You might think it's lonely, trapped in a small dark box 6 feet underground, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. After all, you won't be alone in your final resting place. You'll have billions of tiny microbes and thousands of gnawing insects hungry for your company. Death might seem like the end, but it is really just the beginning of an eventful and pretty predictable process that turns the walking, talking version of you into a grinning skeleton. Join us today as we break down the stages of decomposition with all the gas, goo, odors, and waxy residue along the way. We'll explain how we measure these stages, why they happen, and how they can even help us solve crimes. Welcome to our first spooky episode of the 2024 season, where we go on a journey to discover what happens to your body after you die. That's what you're in for today on Impolite Society.
Oh, I just detest rude, unladylike young ladies.
I hope you don't mind me being a tad rude.
I myself am strange and unusual.
Don't be rude.
That is some weird, wild stuff.
Shocking, isn't it?
It's a scandal!
But it's provocative.
Please stop making me blush.
Welcome to Impolite Society, the podcast that gets our hands dirty and digging into the gory details of those taboo topics and giving it to you in a clean, sanitized package. I'm Rachel.
And doesn't fear that fucking Reaper, Laura.
And speaking of getting our hands dirty to make things cleaner and nice for other people, that's got me thinking. Laura, have you ever worked with like a biohazard cleanup or like a biological cleanup company?
No, but I did once call the police on a suspicious looking bone in my backyard. I think I had been watching way too much true crime and I was like, what is this bone? How did it get here? I called the police. It was a fucking ham bone and I'm an idiot.
That's actually amazing because what if it was a human?
I was like, this looks like a human knee. The officer was a woman who came out and was like, I don't know. We'll have to call the crime scene people legitimately. And they came out, they took one look at it and they said, that is a ham
bone.
Goodbye. And I was like, I am a fucking idiot. But then also, I guess the cop that showed
better safe than sorry.
That's what I thought too. But it did have like these weird cuts in it. And they're like, yeah, this is a spiral cut ham bone. Yeah, it was embarrassing. I think I have a picture on it somewhere in like my OneDrive. It comes up every once in a while.
All of this to say is thinking of biohazard cleanup. Those are the people who come in and they got a hell of a job. They clean up the mess that's left behind by decomposing bodies. And, you know, among other things, the one time we came close to calling them was we went on a 2-week vacation. And somewhere along there, our power was shut off. And we came back to a nasty fridge. And there was no way we were going to fix that situation. So we were like, well, should we call like one of these biohazard cleanups that can come in and get rid of all this rotting flesh smell? Oh, we just bought a new fridge.
Yeah,
but
that's what you have to do.
That's what introduced me to these companies. And like, thank God, because they actually make some pretty quality content. They are out there cranking out this good digestible info about how the human body decomposes. And that's especially relevant because today, that's exactly what we're talking about. We are talking about human decomposition, aka what happens after death. So I would love you, Laura, to come along with me on a post-mortem journey that each of us will, in fact, take, if not for any ulterior funerary intervention. Like, obviously, you're not going to decompose if you've been incinerated.
Yeah, if you let nature take its course, this is the way it was meant to go.
Think of this as a part 2, a continuation of our What Is It Like to Die? Because we're picking up exactly where that one ended. And I'm so sorry, friend. I've got bad news. You're dead. Or I guess good news, depending on how you're feeling at this specific moment.
I'm just kind of along for the ride. I'm going wherever the universe is taking me. So, Rachel, I mean, if I'm dead, I'm dead. Where are we going? What am I doing?
Well, buckle in because it's gonna get nasty. So if you're dead, which you are, your lacrima mortis, aka your last tear, has fallen. That's a shout out to the What's It Like to Die. So go check out that episode if you want the part one. Your heart has stopped, and your soul, your spirit, your life force, whatever has made you, has moved on to whatever comes next.
Space dust.
But what can't go with you is that huge lump of organic matter that you've left behind. So, what happens to that mound of flesh and fluid that you used to occupy? Your newly dead body is what we in the profession call fresh.
Freshie.
Is that what you called it in mortuary science school, a freshie?
I think we did. I don't know where that came from. I mean, it literally just came out of your
It
mouth.
just regurgitated from...
Might have.
Because, fun fact, Laura used to work with dead bodies all the time.
I did. I was in funerary service school. I was 6 months short of graduating until I bailed. So I spent.
So was that like 2 years, year and a half?
It was a year and a half. I spent a year in the classroom and then another 6 months split between the classroom and doing the embalmings at a funeral home.
Yeah, so Laura's got hands-on experience with dead bodies. I've got a lot of internet research experience with dead bodies. Hey, so we're the same. Okay, let's go on. Just kidding. But you're fresh. And that's actually what it's literally called. It's called the fresh phase of decomposition, aka the freshest you'll ever be ever again.
all downhill
downhill
from here.
Yep. So while you're fresh, enjoy it because this is the first stage. While you're in this stage of decomposition, your muscles relax. That's the first thing that happens after your life force has faded. And this, of course, will include all those muscles you've spent your lifetime mastering, keeping contracted. So, yep, you know where I'm going with this. That is why there's that rumor that you will pee-pee or poo-poo after you're dead because those muscles that are holding that inside of you, they relax and all of it just kind of flows out, leaks out.
And I think that this doesn't always happen. I have seen a lot of dead bodies and very little post-mortem poo. And this might be because most of the dead people that I embalmed were people who were ready to go. So these are people in nursing homes, probably under some kind of hospice situation, or they'd been in the ones that weren't like that. They usually have an autopsy done. So they've already cleaned all that
That's
shit
already
out,
cleaned out.
literally.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't eat much when you're dying slowly. So I don't think that there was much there.
And that makes sense too, because if you do listen to that, What's It Like to Die, you will learn that most of us will die of old age. And in that process of your body shutting down, the first thing to go is your appetite. Like, you're not going to need to eat to fuel a body that's dying. So that makes sense. And again, I'm going to throw back to another episode way back when we first started Implant Society about will you poop on the table giving birth?
Yeah.
Right. And if you're like Laura and you're stuck in a 30-something hour labor and they won't feed you solids,
Yep.
yeah, you're probably not going to poop on the table because you got nothing to poop.
It's all gone.
So outside of your bowels or your bladder loosening, your eyes will also be one of the first things to go through changes. First, your irises may become cloudy. Also, if you've neglected to shut your eyes before death, I mean, come on, guys, that's like the Hollywood standard. Close those eyes. I take it that's not so much the case.
There's like a little slit because, again, it takes your kind of
Muscles.
muscles to actually bring them all the way down. But in a complete slack state, you're just got like a little slit of eye available.
Right. So that little slit of eye is exposed to the air, which if you are ever a member of a staring contest, you know that that's not the intended function of eyes. So that exposure to air will actually cause them to develop a dark discoloration, and that is something that they call tache noire. My French accent's awful, aka the black line. So it's just like basically the black line that covers the whites of your eyes.
I did not. I've never noticed such a thing, and I don't even remember that being covered in my funeral service textbooks, but I don't doubt that it's there. But I mean, I guess that makes sense. The line is that small bit
Yes.
when you're like half open. Now I want to Google it and I want to see it.
The pupil stays about the same, but it's just dark on either side. And that is, I think it comes from more of like a forensic anthropology of like crime scene forensics piece, because those are going to be the bodies who have just been like chilling. Not in the freezer.
They look like goat eyeballs. You know how goats have the horizontal pupil? That's totally what it looks like. Ooh, spooky. That's spooky. I mean, I've never seen that before.
And that's just right off the bat, right? Because over the next day or so, you're going to go through many more shifts. So as you lie and the minutes drag into hours and the heat that you have generated throughout your life, it begins to fade and you start getting cold. And that happens at about a rate of 1.5 degrees an hour until you are a solid room temperature.
Like a good stick of butter.
So this energy transfer is called algor mortis, right? So that's about the heat spreading off of you. And it's not the only process that happens in this first phase of decomposition.
And fun fact, this is also how forensic people, that's how they approximate time of death, is liver temperature. So they say like, okay, what is the temperature of the internal liver? They stick a giant, spiky thermometer in there to see where that's at, because that algor mortis at that rate is so steady and so replicable, they can gauge the time of death really, really well. But when there are other temperature elements at play, if it's really hot, if it's really cold, that's a whole nother story. But like in your regular like temperature controlled environment, it's standard.
And it's interesting because a body will always feel cold to the touch if it's at room temperature, even though it's the same temperature as the air you're in. Being a human is confusing, right?
We're hot, so when we touch it, it feels cold.
It feels cold, but the air doesn't feel cold. Somehow 90 degrees is hot, even though our bodies are hotter than 90 degrees. It's a mystery. There's no way to understand it. But the good news of your body cooling off is that it's helpful because you have to keep your cool, right? You have to stay very cool because you're about to meet the most famous mortis, which is going to be happening to you at this stage. And that is, of course, if you're going to name a mortis, what mortis do you know? A rigor mortis.
Ooh, I'm so starstruck. Rigor.
You should.
Call it in the biz. They don't call it rigor mortis. They just call it rigor.
Oh, which sounds like opposite. I'm imagining like rigor. I'm feeling rigorous.
Nope.
But no, it's the opposite.
Yep.
Because in this process, after all of our muscles relax, they then tense up. And this happens 2 to 6 hours after death, of course, depending on temperature. And this is the result of a chemical change in the muscles, causing your muscles to flood with calcium ions. I'm getting out of my league here when I start talking about ions. Anyways, it has to do with calcium, and it causes them to like stiffen your muscles. The things that make your muscles contract, there's nothing to move it out. So it just stays in there and your muscles are like rock solid. AKA your muscles become stiff. Your whole body becomes stiff. And that is where we get the name stiff for dead bodies, which you might have heard from, I don't know, any procedural forensic TV show that you've watched.
And that's interesting because the science may have changed. It's been many years since I went to funeral school. But at the time that I did, which was like, 15 years ago. But it used to be that scientists did not really know why we got rigor. There was a theory at the time. There was something about lactic acid buildup, that stuff that makes your muscles burn when you work out, like when you're pumping iron and you're like, yeah, and you can feel it. That's a lactic acid.
I know that feeling. I'm a gym rat. If you can't tell.
And that is built up in the muscles. And like you said, there's nothing to expel it. There's no process to get it out, no oxygen to relieve it. But I don't know if that's still in play these days or if they've discovered calcium ions or whatever an ion is. I don't know.
I cannot speak to the validity of either statements to the extent that like I Googled it and it sounded like they were sure. And I saw a Science Direct article. I looked at it and I thought, way above my head. So I opened Thought Catalog, which was the second result, and I read that, and that explained it. It has something to do with calcium, and which I would imagine like kind of like lactic acid. I don't know. But it's the process of not being able to remove those pieces that gets us stuck. And it actually happens in a predictable order as well. Like we talked about temperature. A theme here is that there's kind of a consistency to what we all go through after we die. And this is not an exception to the rule, because rigor mortis actually begins in the face and then spreads to the rest of the body. So while we can obviously imagine joints not moving or muscles being tight, what does this tension look like in the face? Wow, I thought this was really interesting. This is the standard bug eyes and grimace that you think of when you think of dead bodies in horror movies. And I even dropped in a little picture of the ring of that girl from the opening of the Ring, because that is seared into my brain. And they use it as this image to say I'll never forget her face, the terror she must have been in. But apparently that's a normal process. And people who have the wide eyes and the bared teeth, that's not always an indication that they were going through this intense emotional experience when they died. They weren't necessarily in terror. That's just kind of a natural process.
Because the face muscles are completely tensing.
Yeah, they're contracting.
So if you were to take your face right now and say tense every muscle in your face, that's what you would do. Yeah, that's exactly what you would do. Bug-eyed and baring your teeth. But again, maybe this is due to the type of bodies that I saw the most of, but mostly I just saw a just slack-jawed look. No bug eyes. It looked like a very unflattering sleep. You know, the one where you're like
on an airplane?
Yeah. And you're snoring, but they still look super fucking dead. And they were definitely in rigor, because I had to break rigor with a lot of bodies. It would be light depending on, again, how long it had been. Sometimes they were at the hospital, which means they chilled out in the morgue for a while. The bodies were cold. They were a lot stiffer, but never had that bug-eyed, scary ass look. Luckily.
Yeah, I'm wondering how accurate that piece of information I read was versus lived experience. I'm like, who might have say those corpses weren't going through rigor mortis, and but the thing I do know is you hear that description of corpses a lot, like the grinning, right?
Yeah. And I think maybe that has something to do with as the face decomposes, and the skin
it kind of pulls back.
Tight. Yeah.
But I'm even thinking of the fashion episode we did of that one woman who died and her face was stuck in a grimace. I think that was something we talked about, because I remember listening to it during editing or something while I was researching this, and I was like, or maybe that's just rigor mortis. So we talked about eyes and face a lot, and I still who knows? I'm not a scientist. If you're a scientist, tell us. But a fun fact that I did learn about this process, which is very morbid, but if you're here for the morbid fun facts. And it is that rigor mortis can also make your anus look dilated, which is also especially common in children.
What?
So I'm sorry, world. But it's a fact. So this has led many investigators of children, child deaths, to assume that the children were sexually abused before death, but that's not the case. It's a part of the natural breakdown. It's something to do with the relaxing and the tightening, and it makes it look open. So
because
fun fact,
to tighten it is to release it. That's one of those contradictory.
Exactly. Yeah, and for some reason it's more applicable to children than adults. Again, I don't have all the answers. I just have a microphone.
Badly trained asshole is what it is. It's children.
Well, probably
quite
so basically. So remember that the next time you're investigating a child murder.
I'm sure that'll really come in handy. Noted.
Who said you don't learn relevant information on the show? The moral of the story is that your face and your anus, it will relax again, eventually. And that is usually within a day or two. So the muscles that are tight, they just break down themselves. So then, boop, you're back to loosey-goosey.
Yeah, or until a funeral service student starts to massage your limbs until they loosen up so they can pose the body. And the number of times that I thought that I was going to break fingers was a lot.
Oh, no.
I never did, Or at least I never thought I did. But who's gonna complain?
Nobody will notice.
Nobody will notice as long as they're still generally in the right spot. But yeah, there was a lot of times that I'm like, if I do this any harder, I'm gonna break these fingers.
The skin is still holding it all in the general shape of a finger. But that's so, like, when you said pose the body. I know you mean
Yeah,
like a vampire, but I'm imagining like Marilyn Monroe sprawled out, like, hey, that's how I want to be posed if I am posed. I don't know what's going to happen to my body after I die.
good luck fitting into a coffin posing like Marilyn Monroe.
Oh no, they're going to shove me in the fire like that. Or whatever the fuck's going to happen to me. I don't know. I haven't decided that yet.
I have literally no preference. I mean, whoever...
I'm dead!
Yeah, exactly. Whoever has to deal with my dead body, do you want to pay for a plot? I don't care. It's up to you. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, my favorite cemetery does like green burials. And I'm like, that sounds good to me. So in this stage, we're still in the fresh stage. We haven't even made it past being fresh yet. There's another mortis that takes place, and that's called liver mortis. And that is essentially the process of gravity pulling your blood down, 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 right? Where does the water flow? Well, it flows down low as it can go. Gravity, again, another thing we don't understand. I don't know. Anyways, what it does is it pulls the blood and it causes these bruise-like pools under the skin at the lowest part of your body. So if you're on like sea level and you're laying flat, the bottom half. If you're on a hill, your feet, or your head, if vice versa. Just think down. And that's where this bruising look is going to happen.
You were to like pour water on the top of a body that was dead. Where is it going to pool? That's where the blood is going to pool. That's where the liver mortis is going to appear. And this is another way that forensic people decide, in what position you were left in when you died. I don't know. I think it's really interesting that this is such a predictable thing that happens and we can glean so much information of it. I think it's kind of cool.
Well, yeah, you think you're special. You ain't. You're gonna decompose exactly like the rest of us. And the great equalizer.
And they're gonna use it to catch a fucking murderer.
But all these mortises, these are only what you would see if you were a third-party observer of the body you've left behind. Turns out your dead body is actually pretty lively. You just have to look close enough. So that pile of flesh you've left behind is actually a very hot commodity. And the line of microbes waiting to snack on you, guess what? It's already forming inside of you right now.
Hot chow, line up, boys. I really am. I'm just picturing, that triangle dinner bell in an old western town. Like,
soup's on.
Yep.
Oh, man. Because they're there now. And while we're alive, we are able to hold these microinvaders off through the use of our immune system. Well, guess what? When the blood stops pumping and those walls of defense go tumbling down, 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 that dinner bell is ringing, right? Life truly is a never-ending battle. And when the fight is over, the feast is on.
Nom, 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 nom.
And those little guys waste no time. As early as 4 minutes after your heart stops, the party begins.
4 minutes. Wow.
Fast.
Wow. That's really interesting to think of, like, what a just tiny window is between you and absolute annihilation. And also how easily people get sepsis and die because there's just so much shit in your body.
Well, yeah, because if something is happening and that breaks down, that process of defense breaks down, 4 minutes is all it takes.
Ugh.
Because when your cells are deprived of oxygen and their acidity increases as the toxic byproducts of the chemical reactions begin to accumulate inside of them, enzymes begin to digest the cell membranes and then leak out as the cells themselves break down through a process called autolysis, aka cellular self-digestion. That sounds pretty appetizing, right? But like a can of beer in the freezer, these cells, the pressure builds up and then they pop open. And that's when those microbes shout, Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
This is hitting all of the references.
I just love that one because it's just like when you think about it critically, you're like, do orcs have menus? Do they go to orc restaurants? It just, then all of a sudden it starts to crumble like the cell membranes after you've died. And these microbes, they don't come far. The ones that have decided to slurp up your leaky enzymes. The microbes that are the first to jump on this all-you-can-eat buffet, they're inside of you right now.
And I know exactly where that they would be. They're in your poop chute, right?
Exactly. They are locked deep down in the bowels of your, I guess bowels. But too long, they've been relegated to eating your scraps. Now, with no more immune system to protect you, they are ready to devour you. They're going to bust through the barriers that kept them in check, and they're going to slurp up that yummy enzyme soup, beginning with your liver and pancreas specifically. So it's interesting you mentioned liver temperature, because that is the first thing that's going to break down because it's one of your most enzyme-heavy organs, as well as your big, sexy brains, folks, because it's full of water, and I guess that makes it easier. Again, I'm reporting the facts. I don't know where the facts come from.
It's very soft, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, my brain is very soft. Like, think of a bruised apple. It's my brain.
But I mean, it's interesting. So microbes, they haven't even really started breaking down necessarily like the structures. The structures are breaking down themselves
On their own.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
they're
what
just
creates the buffet. I could not have made a better sound myself. So as the microbes take over, it is their time. In the research that I did, I've seen this microbe safari referred to with very lofty terms, such as the cadaveric ecosystem and the necrobiome.
I like necrobiome.
That's concise. Cadaveric ecosystem is a mouthful. I'm not going to try to say cadaveric ecosystem for the rest of this episode. No. But while they have these fancy names, to most people who will see your corpse at this phase, they would choose a different term. Nasty. Because up until now, your body has looked mostly like you, but that's about to change. Because now those microbes have taken over, and the party is about to get tart.
Turn down for what?
Fun fact that Kids Bop has done a version of that song, and it comes up on my Silly Songs playlist. And so my toddler is bouncing along to turn down for what? It's very adorable, in my opinion.
We do Roll Out by Ludacris, the clean version when we leave the house. Roll out.
Oh, so you're like, okay, y'all got to get out of the house by the time the song's over.
Yep.
And just like when you hear the Kids Bop version of Turn Down for What, you know the party is on. This is where the real fun begins. Because these microbes are chowing down on your soft tissues and turning it into a nice gooey goo through a process called putrefaction.
Oh, I'm very familiar with that term.
And if you're like me, you can kind of understand what comes next on this microbe bacteria feast, right? Because I myself, I like to indulge. I like to eat. I like to feel full. But what happens after you had a nice big meal, a nice big Thanksgiving meal?
Instant regret.
And guilt. But we don't need to get into that. That's a different episode. You fart, right? You got to fart. You got to burp. You're going to expel these gases that are a byproduct of digestion. They fart, and they fart a lot. And just like in your aunt's living room after Thanksgiving dinner, those farts begin to add up.
Everyone's like, woo! Gotta get out of here.
Yeah, it's like, oh, crack a window, please. Now take that living room and the dozen people you might have in there, multiply it by hundreds of millions of little tiny cells. It adds up way fast. And that means every crevice of your body becomes filled with this gaseous byproduct, such as methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia. And guess what, baby? Welcome to phase 2, bloating.
I mean, you really can't catch a break, right? You spend your whole life trying to fight the bulge, look trim, and then boom, you're dead. You're looking bloated and fat.
That's the circle of life. You start as a hot young freshie and you turn into a big old bloaty. But it's okay because we're going to be bone thin at the end. So outside of the strange bruising and contorted faces you might have seen in the first phase of decomp, it's not until about 48 hours in that you really start to get those obvious dead person signs, which is what this phase is named after, bloating. We all know the feeling, as we talked about. And this is pretty much the same, right? The abdomen of the body becomes swollen with the gases from those micro burps and farts. And the bloat phase of decomposition can occur between 2 to 6 days after death. Again, of course, it's going to depend on your external environment that you're in.
Temperature, mostly from the abdomen, because most of those microbes are all in your gut. Your gut is in your abdomen, so that's where it really...
It's going to, yeah, they're not going to...
First, yeah.
They're not going to migrate to your toes to start.
No.
Guys. What would a person see in the bloat phase if they happened upon your rotting corpse? Not only may you seem bloated, but your skin might begin to change color as well, turning to that nice marble look that we think of corpses, or even that tint of green, which this green color occurs when those sulfur gases that are created through the burping microbes, they are trapped and then they react with the hemoglobin in blood, which if you're like me and you don't know any biological functions, hemoglobin is what carries the oxygen to your body. I don't know. They're stuck in there. And it turns into something called, creatively named, sulfahemoglobin, which is a green pigmented molecule. So that green pigment is the specific thing that is a natural reaction of that process.
I did not know that.
I specifically looked it up. Again, the marbling is more like the bruising that comes with the blood. But I was like, what makes a dead body green? My fingers did the walking, and now my mouth is doing the talking. But it's not just what your body looks like during this phase. It's what it smells like. And if you're familiar with any of those gases, you know that it is a bit stinky. So in this phase, the putrid smell that corpses are so famous for, when the gas starts to escape, you get cute little things like blood bubbles appearing from the nostrils and other orifices if you care to look there.
And the smell, it's distinctive. There's no mistaking the smell of rotting flesh. It's very stomach turning.
It's bad. And that's like an evolutionary thing, right? To deter you away from these rotting corpses. But I mean, I have not worked in funeral services, and I know the smell, not from humans, but from other dead and rotting things. Oh my God, the worst. So, in a park nearby my house, a possum died in a tree, and it like fell and was caught in one of the crooks. It hung there and rotted. Nobody from the park came and got it.
Oh, wow.
Nothing. It stayed there for a week, and it smelled awful. And it was so funny. This family was walking with their toddler through the stank zone, and their little toddler is like, stinky, stinky. And I'm like, yeah, girl, you're saying what we're all thinking. It was nasty. So we all, like, you know, death does not smell good.
Yeah.
And as time continues on, that necrobiome, see, I'm using that big word, it flourishes and the gas continues to build. And this pressure, it will begin to tick, 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 like it's ready to blow.
Hello.
And it will definitely cause parts of your body to blow. Oh. Because after all that, the gases that are produced in the body, it needs to fucking escape. It needs to go somewhere. And to start with, some of those inside pieces of your body, like your eyes and your tongue, they may become outside pieces of your body as that gas fights for space. To the extreme, if that gas has nowhere to go, like if it's trapped within a sealed airtight casket, you can even get explosions as that pressure builds. And one famous case of this is our good old boy, Henry VIII, who I learned his coffin exploded in a late night scrolling TikTok. And I learned it on one of those TikToks that have the Tudor facts along with the song that goes, I bite at the hand that feeds me. I love at the face that feeds me. Do you know? You've never seen any of those? Well, that might just be my For You page. But it's called Possibly in Michigan. And if you hear that song, you know you're going to get slapped in the face with some interesting Tudor facts.
Oh.
So be on the lookout. But anyways, our boy, Henry VIII, he is rumored to have exploded in his own casket because they were very pish-poshy with what they did with his body. I think he laid in his deathbed for 2 days because nobody wanted to acknowledge that the king had died. And then they took him on this big, long mourning tour. And eventually at one of the stops on the tour, when they're taking him to his final resting place, boom.
The casket exploded or he exploded?
He exploded in the casket. The casket exploded. Boom, boom. Something exploded. And apparently this happens to this day because according to Josh Slocum, executive director of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, a.k.a. the self-proclaimed Consumer Reports for the Dead, you could actually make a lawsuit out of a loved one exploding. So, Laura, you worked in funeral services. Is an airtight casket supposed to be good?
No, it is not. And also, you
can't.
And you also cannot say that they are airtight or leak proof or anything like that. Because they'll pay for a vault kind of thing, like this concrete slab that goes into the ground, and then they put the casket in there and then put a lid on it and then fill it with dirt. And they're like, oh, it keeps the water from coming in, but they can't say that it doesn't leak because it will inevitably leak. And there was a big lawsuit about it at some point, and that's why you can't say it. But it's fucking stupid. You're dead. You're going to rot. You're going to putrefy. There is no stopping nature.
I'm already decaying. It's already in process, guys, so let it happen.
100%.
And the encapsulation doesn't have to occur within a coffin or a concrete slab. It can also deal with your body, right? So it finds its way out, whether that's through the orifices that you have or cracks in your skin. I mean, bloating can sometimes cause a thing called degloving. Don't look it up.
There's a lot of different terms for degloving. It's also skin slip. But
basically, your big old fat body pushes your skin off you like a fucking spider molting.
Yeah, they go to pick you up and they'll grab your arms and lift and just your skin comes off. Skin slip.
Yeah. So I think maybe just put me in the ground by then. Let that happen, or incinerate me. I don't know. Oh, man, lots of great stuff is happening in our decaying body because as this process of bacteria byproduct, it puts you into that next phase of decomposition that's literally called the active phase, right? So you could be active after you're dead. And this typically kicks into effect around 5 days after death if, you're laying on a floor of a borealis forest. And it can last for another 5 to 6 days. During this phase, all those gases that have been trapped in you, they're being released. And then you can get to work liquefying. We're really covering all the states of matter here.
Solid, liquid, gas. We're all of it. It's the circle of life.
You can do it all. You ever wanted to be liquid? You're gonna. Because coming in as a surprise to literally no one, this phase is the smelliest, right? We thought bloating was bad. Oh no, this one's even worse. Because as we break down, those various compounds contribute to a very potent odor of a decomposing body, including a bunch of words that I probably should have looked up how to say. Cavardine, putrescine, scalitol, indole, and a variety of sulfur-containing compounds, which if you've ever been to Yellowstone National Park, sulfur be stinking.
That's what farts are made out of.
Some people like farts.
I bet they do.
And some people like dead bodies. Necrophilia.
Yep.
Watch that episode. Listen to that episode.
On purpose.
I am. I gotta tone it down. I'm really reaching. We're reaching into farting. We're reaching into digestion. Pooping on vacation, probably. Here's a drinking game. Drink every time Rachel throws out another episode in Polite Society. Honestly, this is a good mental exercise. See if I can remember all the episodes.
I'm impressed. You're making a lot of connections.
Yeah, Krampus. No, just kidding. Almost as off-putting as a podcaster shamelessly referencing all of their previous episodes is the smell of a decomposing body. And that is very, very off-putting to those of us living. But it does smell quite alluring to insects. And also a stray dog that supposedly broke into the church that held Henry VIII's exploded coffin to lap up the putrid liquids that were leaking out.
Ugh.
Dogs are fucking nasty.
That's disgusting. Ew.
Just drinking a Monarch. More than the rest of us will accomplish. But anyways, during this phase, the day of the microbe has come to an end. You will see much more insect activity in the active phase. So flies, they begin laying their eggs like basically when you died, right? Within hours of death. But at this phase, those little baby maggots have started to hatch and they will come alive and they will be chomping on you. And there's going to be a lot of maggots, guys. Like, just buckle in because this is a big deal. Like, this is a super sale that people travel to from miles around. BOGO on putrefied flesh. All sales are final. Every bit must go. Insects who catch the aroma of a carcass will travel for miles around to get in on the action. And they are not alone, those flies and dogs, because beetles will also emerge and they will come in and they'll get involved and they want to eat the maggots. So it's a fucking food chain happening on your decomposing body. You feed the flies feed the beetles feed the birds, and it all goes around and around and around and around and around.
We've seen The Lion King.
And your big bloated body, it begins to shrink away and is finally able to fit back into those jeans you have at the back of your closet that you just can't let yourself get rid of because you think, what if? What if?
Finally.
Now's your time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Somebody take my putrefied body and slap those jeans on them from my sophomore year of high school with the rivets down the side. I've always loved them. Never been able to get rid of them. They're back there. Just shove them on my
They're waiting for your active decomposition phase. Just put those femurs right in there. Because here's the thing. Your body provides that all-you-can-eat buffet, but the good times cannot go on forever. Which, I mean, honestly, you've come to understand, right? Because you're dead. So somewhere between a week and a month, your body will enter the post-decay phase. In this phase, most of your flesh is stripped away from the bone, and only really dense areas remain.
Cartilage.
Yep. This time is marked when the majority of those hungry buggies have officially given up and flown the coop.
Gone to the next BOGO sale.
Yeah, they're sniffing around for that next ammonia odor, the next sulfur. Where can I find a good sulfur smell? But they're not all gone because there's one holdout. The larvae of the dermicid beetle continues to clean the skeleton, leaving behind the remains that look very similar to those medical grade skeletons that we talked about. So they are really giving those Indian bone factories a run for their money. Throw back to
human bone market.
There you go. Another promo. So those dermicid beetles, they're so effective in cleaning bones that they are in fact used regularly by museums when preparing skeletons for collection and display. And I'm pretty sure that they were consistently referenced within the TV show Bones.
I did. I used to remember that. Are those like kind of everywhere, or is that like a regional thing? Are they in the forests of Missouri when they dump my dead body, or is it in some rainforest somewhere and we just like farm them out?
So they're a family of beetles that are known as skin beetles. So I think that they're probably found in more places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not super regional.
They're not like a specialty. They're just like a kind of beetle. Because things be dying everywhere, right?
Yeah. And they all need to be eaten up everywhere. So it makes sense that every region would kind of evolve
some kind of beetle
to do it. That makes sense.
Yeah, and if that's quite a market to be in, right? Because if nobody else is going to do it, you are
stepping up.
You're in business, right?
Just like the dye creators in our deadly
fashion. Laura, by the end of this episode, if you can bring up sextiles, you will win one imaginary gold star. Anyway, we are in the phase where things start to get weird and waxy. The smell might not be as bad as it was when things were putrefying, but there definitely still is a smell. And that smell is cheesy. And it's caused by butyric acid decaying in fat. So speaking of fat, while it decays, there's a chance it might become adipocere, which is also referred to as corpse wax or grave wax. So adipocere is a light gray or brown waxy material primarily composed of saturated fatty acids, typically formed within approximately 1 month of death. But it's also been known to be found up to 6 months of death. So
I feel like I know something about that. Like I've seen that before.
You probably have.
Somewhere.
Probably touched it.
I probably did. Make soap out of it. Stinkiest soap in the world.
Yeah. So this is the phase where we can fit back in our teenage jeans. So that's how much of us is gone at this point. You're like not a person then, and then you're not a person now, right? The person is what happens when you can't fit in those jeans. So after about a month of decomposition, there's not much left besides bones. Them dry bones. And this is where the process of decomp mostly winds down, leaving the final phase, dry remains. The final stage of decomposition results in those remains that are consisting of course, bones and like maybe some dried skin and cartilage. So there you have it, folks. You've gone from a living, breathing person to a pile of dry bones in about a month, if you fell dead on the ground of a temperate forest. And again, of course, it can all change depending on what happens to your corpse after the fact, whether it's hot, it's cold. The humidity plays a major effect.
Or if you're in water, because that just fucking ruins everything. Like it will just eat through a body like you would not believe. Like it's so gross. Everything happens so fast.
Well, yeah, that's one of the strategies the bone factories used, right? Was they would put the bodies, they dismember them, and they would put them in the Ganges, probably, I don't know, a river in India. And they would just let the water, and they would stay in there for a week, and then they would pull it out and then process it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So water is nasty. I guess if you're trying to get away with a crime, consider water.
It's true. Washes away a lot of evidence, really speeds up decomposition. Hard to tell what exactly happened if they've been in there for more than a few days.
So now we're giving advice to murderers.
That's in polite society, would like to give a legal disclaimer that we are not in any way encouraging anyone to dispose of a dead body in any unlegal or disgusting manner.
Don't dispose of a dead body. Don't create a dead body.
Yeah, that's probably better, yeah.
And trust, not just from Laura messing around with waterlogged bodies. We, on a wider scale, know how these conditions affect human decay. Because decay follows a predictable path that we can actually use to help solve murder.
Yeah, like I said, with the liver temp and the liver mortis and things like that, it's like a detective agency right inside your own body.
We're all snitches deep down. And the power of this is shown through a 2013 study that found that post-mortem microbial communities, aka a necrobiome, the changes are dramatic, measurable, and repeatable in a mouse model system. So that is allowing us to estimate time of death to a 3-day window over 48 days. So after 48 days, we can find a time of death within a 3-day window. And that has major capabilities, right? Because if you find a body and you can pinpoint when it might have died, there you go. Look at the missing persons in that window.
Yep.
But to understand how decay works, to get this knowledge, we need to rely on big data. And that is what has created these major strides in understanding human decomp. And to create those patterns or understand that timeline, we have to build a data set. And that means you got to be constantly swabbing a lot of cadavers. And this is where enters body farms.
I love this shit. This is what I read in Stiff by Mary Roche. Read her whole thing about it, and I was like, I think I want to do something like this. I'm a fucking weirdo. I know. I can't help it.
No, it was also in the book that I read by an author. I can't remember her name, but she's like the wannabe Mary Roche. Her book's called Gory Details. Sorry, girl. She had a blog on a major news outlet, and that got turned into a book. But anyway, she talked about it a lot as well. It could be its own episode. It's an episode that maybe you could research, Laura, because for whatever reason, I could not find enough to expand upon it or enough for me that I wanted to say about it. But essentially, body farms are places that just get donor bodies and they just leave them. They scatter them about, kind of like my living room after my toddler has gone through and taken every toy and thrown it into different places. They take these human bodies, they put them in these different situations, and they track their decay. And I mean like every situation. Dressed, undressed, some are in water, some are just laying on the ground, some are in cement, some are left in a car trunk. They're literally trying to understand how bodies decompose under all these conditions that somebody might put a body in if they were trying to hide it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It also depends on where this is. So if they're outside, you're at the natural conditions of the location that you're in, the bugs of the place that you're in. So really, we need as many of these as possible.
Yeah, I want to say there's one in the Northeast, one in Arkansas, and one in Texas are kind of like the three main ones.
Oh,
I think Texas was one of the first ones that opened. Looking on a more minor scale, there's a theory that's being studied right now where scientists in the field are hoping to take a closer look at a deceased person's own DNA and how the DNA breaks down. That might determine time of death to a 12-hour window. Like there is a case study where that has worked and they have been able to find a missing person who correlated. They found the person, their remains. That sounds way more sensitive. They were able to identify them based on the fact that they had narrowed down the time of death. And then they were able to pull up the missing persons reports from that time. And that was using how the body broke down. And that was in one of the books mentioned, either The Gory Details or Stiff by Mary Roche. Can't remember which one I was listening to when I wrote that tidbit. But it's in there. And it's very specific. It's not quite to the scale, right, as looking at insect activity or even just the decay or the microbiome yet, but it is something they're looking at because not only can it tell you a specific time of death into that very narrow window, but it might also be able to provide specific health information about the person when they died, right? So again, this is getting outside of crime, but more into natural causes. But if they're able to tell what's happening with the person, they might be able to say why they died. Like, was it a heart attack? Was it X, Y, and Z? That's just the thing that they're starting to unlock. And this is where you could really spiral off and you could have episode after episode after episode just about these specific things that they're working on.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, so if you don't have like a DNA sample to compare, to say, oh, this is definitely Rachel's body because we have Rachel's DNA, they could say, well, based on her DNA, she had brown hair.
It was more like, this is the path that DNA takes as it breaks down. So this DNA is this many hours decayed, or like this many days decayed. So then you can pick like, oh, this has been decaying for 50 days, and oh, Rachel went missing 49 days ago, right? And of course you could tell female, blah, 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 those kind of basic things.
Yeah.
And so that you could like narrow down your missing persons. But then also the health stuff, I didn't quite understand that. That was kind of a blip, and it's a little bit maybe ambitious, but that's where they're thinking this stuff can go in the future. And let's hope they get it, right? Because if we can solve murders and we can figure out why people died and who these bodies are, that's a win. That's a win for humanity.
Yep.
And man, that is a good place to leave it because I am feeling my abdomen filling with gas which means it's probably time for us to wrap up this episode. Time for this episode to meet its natural end and begin its own process of decaying in your ear holes, folks.
And thank you so much for listening. But please don't leave our podcast laying out there to rot, dressed, undressed, in cement, in water. Leave us a 5-star review or a rating. And if you just want to keep us from getting to that dead, rotting body farm, tell a friend about us, because recommendations are truly our lifeblood.
They keep us pumping and flowing. Thank you so much for joining us. May your leaky cells spill over with enzyme fluids and your microbe parties never end. Stay curious, our little socialites, and keep marching to the beat of your own drum.
Turn down for what?
Well, that's copyrighted.